Ann Haubmeyer, Director of the Norfolk Library, and on behalf of our staff, Kelly Condor-Hughes and Eileen Fitzgibbons, we want to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us this morning, and especially to our two speakers, Dr. Rajani LaRocca and Brent Taylor. And Kelly has an introduction to give now to them. So thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you. And before I get started with the introduction, I just want to say that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. Rajani and Brent are going to have a great conversation, and then they will be delighted to answer any questions at the end. So here we go. Dr. Rajani LaRocca was born in India, raised in Kentucky, and now lives in the Boston area with her wonderful family and impossibly cute dog. A graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Medical School, she spends her time writing novels and picture books, practicing medicine, and baking too many sweet treats. She is also the co-host of the STEM Women in Kidlit podcast. Her middle grade debut, Midsummer's Mayhem, Yellow Jacket, Little Bee Books, an Indian-American mashup of A Midsummer's Night Dream and competitive baking, was an Indies Introduced selection, an Indie Next Pick, a Kirkus Best Middle Grade Book of 2019, and a 2020 Massachusetts Book Award honor title. Her middle grade novel in verse, Red, White, and Whole, Quiltree Books, HarperCollins, has received multiple star reviews and is a Junior Library Guild Standard Selection, a Spring 2021 Indie Next Top 10 list, and a New England Book Award finalist. Her third middle grade novel, Much Ado About Baseball, Yellow Jacket, Little Bee Books, was featured on the Today Show and is a Junior Library Guild Gold Standard Selection with a Kirkus starred review. She has written multiple picture books, 5 of which have been published in the last year, and you can learn more about her at her website, www.rajanilarocca.com, and on Twitter and Instagram at Rajani LaRocca. So welcome, Rajani.
Thank you.
Now, Brent Taylor is a literary agent at Triada US, where he specializes in children's books. He joined the agency in 2014 as an intern and has since built a robust list of picture books, middle grade, and YA. Some of his other clients include Sayantani DasGupta, Whitney Gardner, KD Halbrook, and Louie Zong. In addition to his role as an agent, he oversees audio and foreign rights for the entire agency. Outside of work, some of his favorite things are the beach and ocean, sweet, cheap Southern wine, and reading books on porch swings. In his next life, Brett wants to be a CIA agent. You can find him on Twitter at btaylorbooks and online at btaylorbooks.com. So if the two of you want to take it away, we are delighted to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. This is so exciting to be here. And I'm so thrilled to talk about middle grade books with Brent because they're like my absolute favorite.
Yes, we could talk about middle grade all day long, I think.
Absolutely. Brent, before we kind of launch into books, do you want to talk a little bit about what a literary agent is and what you do?
Yes, so a literary agent represents a writer and submits their work to the editors at the publishing houses. Because the thing is that if you want to be a writer who's published by the major trade publishing houses, those editors that work at those publishing houses, they do not accept submissions from the general public. Those editors will only accept submissions from the agents that they know, agents that know their taste and the types of books that they are looking for. So I will work with a writer to get their work, to be as strong as possible. And then I will submit it to the editors that I know that I think would love the book as much as I do. And then hopefully we, end up with an offer from a publisher. And then an agent will negotiate that offer, to get the author the fairest terms possible. Not only a strong advance for the book, but things like royalties and all sorts of contract language. And then after that, the agent is negotiating the contract. And some publishing contracts can be as short as 10 pages, and some can be as long as 40 pages, single spaced. So you certainly need an agent with experience, to be reviewing those on your behalf. And from there, I think that an agent really is there for a writer to hold their hand throughout the publishing process. And I think the amazing thing about having an agent is that as a writer, you are working on that book and you only have your experience, but then the agent that you're working with and the agency that they work at, hopefully they have books with every single major trade publisher, and have context for what is normal in this industry, what is not normal, what the processes are, and so your agent is there to answer any questions you have, to hold your hand throughout that publishing process, and also to contextualize for you, what's normal and what's not. I think the agent is also there for any problems that come up throughout the publication process. So if you're having, a difficult time communicating with your editor, your agent is there to help you. If you hate your book cover, but you don't want to be in the awkward position of telling your publisher that you hate your book cover, your agent is there to be the bad cop, and articulate, what the problems are, and how you all are feeling. And I think that it's also amazing to have an agent so that, as a writer, you want your relationship with your editor to remain creative and pure and, tension free. And so your agent can kind of be the one to have the tough conversations on your behalf. If there is a need for those conversations, happily, many books are published, with just great energy and no problems, but sometimes they do come up, and that's what your agent is there for. And I know at this point, I'm just monologuing all about what an agent does, but there's really a lot to it. So, an agent can help you review your marketing and publicity plans and contextualize it for you and tell you, what may be missing from it, what's normal. We are working on subsidiary rights for our authors' books. So we are taking our clients' books and selling the audiobook rights, selling the foreign translation rights, selling film and TV rights also. There are so many different rights to utilize in a book apart from just, publishing it here in the English language for a United States audience. So we're trying to exploit as many rights as possible, and just expand the readership for the book as wide as possible. And then, years after a book has been published, we are still working on that book because we are processing royalty statements that come in. And a royalty statement is a report that you get from your publisher, outlining the number of copies sold of the book and any royalties due. And often we are noticing, discrepancies with those statements or missing information, missing sales, which results in more money for the author. So the work never stops once we have sold the book.
Yes. And I would just like to emphasize that your agent is your advocate, and also is sometimes your psychiatrist. So when things are great, it's wonderful to just share stuff with you. And when things are terrible, or, not terrible, but when something is disappointing, it's also fun to share stuff with you. So I always appreciate that about our relationship. So so let's maybe talk about ourselves and how we got into publishing in the first place. Does that sound okay? Yeah. So I was one of those kids that loved books, like from a very, very young age. And I loved like all kinds of books. I was like a real book nerd. I loved fiction and nonfiction, and I loved novels, and I loved comic books, and I loved comic strips. I like read everything I could get my hands on. Like if I didn't have anything to read at the breakfast table, I would just read the cereal books. So that was me. And so I read a lot and I wrote a lot in school. And I did like creative writing, but I knew from an early age that I wanted to go into medicine. And so I kind of put writing aside. I was like, that's really not going to be my career. And I remember I had a creative writing class in high school, and like I just had a wonderful teacher. And I said to him one day, I said, I really love this, but I know this is not what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I'm going to go to medical school. I want to be a doctor. And he turned to me and he said, "Who says you have to choose?" And he brought in all these books by doctors who were also authors. And at the time they were all men, which was interesting, but hey, that was awesome. It was still really lovely. And it just planted a seed in my head about what the possibilities might be down the line. And so then I went to college and medical school and residency. And I gotta tell you, in medical school and residency, I had no more room in my head for anything. Like if I read a book, it was good. If I read a book that didn't have to do with medicine, I was lucky. So I did that. And then I had little kids, and then I was practicing medicine. And it was about 10 years ago that I decided I wanted to go back to being creative in some way that had nothing to do with birthday parties, which I was really awesome at also. So I took some writing classes online, and then I took some writing classes in person, and I met other writers. And for me, that was really the gateway to continuing to write, which was meeting other writers and feeling like I had a community and feeling like I was connected to people who cared about what I was writing about. So, when your friend says, "Hey, what happens next in that story?" You're like, okay, I guess I better go back and keep writing this story. And, so I would say that I always thought I was going to be a novelist, and I didn't know what kind of novelist until I started taking those writing classes. And then it became clear that I wanted to write for kids, because in retrospect, I realized that the books that meant the most to me in my life were the books that I read when I was a kid. And I also think that my brain is kind of stuck at 12 or 13. So I was like, that's who I want to write for. I want to write for kids. As you know, Midsummer's Mayhem was my first novel that I ever wrote. And so it took me, I think I first drafted it in 2014, and it wasn't until 2017 that we signed. So all that time I was working on it, and it really was the book that taught me how to write books. And I'm really grateful that it got published, because I know that it's not true for a lot of people. For a lot of people, the first book they write is not published, and probably appropriately so. But yeah, so I'm just, when I talk to kids about writing, I emphasize that it can take a long time. And to children, many of whom were not born in 2011, they're kind of, their heads explode a little bit. They're like, wait a minute, what? And I'm like, I know, but anything worth doing is worth, trying for a long time, before you actually get to where you want to be. So yeah. And then the other thing I will say is that when I first started writing, I was worried that I was going to run out of ideas. And now it has become apparent that I will never have enough time to write all the ideas I have. So it's exciting too. So what about you, Brent? How did you get into the publishing world?
So I feel like this is my publishing journey is a novel in and of itself, but it's full of twists and turns and all sorts of things. But the short version, I think, is that when I was a kid, I was behind grade level in reading. And I just never read books for fun. I wasn't in a family where, anyone loved reading or books. And because of that, I struggled with reading. And then, by the end of elementary school, I finally had caught up and was fine. And then in middle school, I really struggled to make friends. And in my class, I knew which kids I wanted to be friends with, but I didn't know how to infiltrate that friend group, I guess you would say. But they were all reading Twilight. these sixth graders, and that was like around the time when Twilight was coming out. And so I decided like, oh, I will read Twilight, and that'll be my in, to this group of kids, that'll be how we connect. So I read Twilight, and, they became my friends, and they loved books, and I completely fell in love with books at that point. And then also in middle school, that was around the time that I was, figuring out my identity and figuring out that I was gay. And I had discovered gay characters in these different, middle grade and young adult books that I was reading. And that was so special to me. And it was really powerful just to, see that this was something that was okay. Because this character was gay and living their life and, attending a vampire academy. And I think that's when I realized that books were not only amazingly entertaining and fun to read, but also could really help develop your sense of personhood and help you figure out your place, in this world, whether it's serious literary fiction or if it is a vampire series. So that was why books were really special to me in middle school. And that's when I fell in love with reading. And then in high school, I started following authors online on social media and realizing that they would talk about, their agent or their editor or their publicist. And so I would Google these terms and kind of do some research. And I figured out that there was an entire industry, behind creating books, and that a writer didn't just, write a book and slap a cover on it and print it, and that was how books were created, and send them off to Barnes and Noble. I realized like there was a whole team that writers worked with, to professionally create their books. And I was so in love with books that just felt so fascinating to me. And so when I was in high school, I was, involved in the online publishing community, on social media. And an agent, was following me on social media and reached out and said, hey, I really like what you have to say about books. Would you like to be an intern for me and read middle grade and YA manuscripts? And I really didn't know what that meant, but I said yes. And so all throughout high school, I was interning for literary agents. So I would wake up at 5 a.m. and drink a coffee and, be reading queries in other agents' query inboxes. And then on the bus home from school, I would be checking email on my iPhone, like seeing what my bosses had forwarded to me, the manuscripts to read. And so I would do my homework, and then I would be reading manuscripts and writing readers' reports. And, my bosses would tell me, you really write the best readers' reports out of all of our interns. And it made me feel like I could work in book publishing, and I wasn't just some random, teenage kid. And so I knew in high school that I wanted to work in publishing. And as I learned more about publishing, I really figured out that agenting specifically was what I loved most of all, because being a literary agent, this is the most entrepreneurial job in all of publishing. It's both incredibly creative, and it's also very business-like. You're negotiating deals, contracts, you're selling rights, reviewing statements, all of those things. And so what I really loved most of all about this job was that it, it provided the opportunity to use all different parts of your brain all throughout the course of a day, instead of just being one specific thing. So it was my teenage dream, literally, to be a literary agent. And I, when I graduated high school, I didn't go to college, for a whole other reason and story that we don't have time to get into. But I sent my resume to agencies that I thought had an amazing list, but also that there was room to grow and to develop that list. And so my expertise has always been children's books and young adult. And so I sent my resume to my current boss, Uwe Sender, who owns Triada US. And I was really drawn to Triada US because Uwe had been in business, I think, for over a decade and had an amazing list, but it was primarily nonfiction for adults. That being said, he did represent some fiction here and there, and the fiction that he did have on his list, I really loved those books, and they were amazing, and they were published by incredible imprints and, had received starred reviews. So I sent my resume to him, and we have conflicting stories about this, but I will give my version of events. So in my memory, I sent my resume and I said, do you have an internship program? I would love to be an intern for you. And he said, no, but if I ever do, I'll get in touch. And a few months later, I saw that he had posted an internship opportunity, I think, to his website. So I, very quickly emailed him again and said, please hire me. You already have my resume. And from there, we had a conversation. I got the internship. That was the summer of 2014. So I did that internship, and it was such an amazing experience. I had never interned for someone that, would take the time to really mentor me and give me all of the information about publishing that I was really looking for. And so it was just an amazing experience. And then at the end of that internship, he offered me a job to start building my own list and to become an agent. So I believe September 15th, 2014, I opened to queries, and I made my first. Few months later, in May of 2015, when I was 19 years old, I sold my first book. And then now, 7 years later, I represent this amazing list of incredibly beautiful books that I'm just so proud of.
Wow.
Yes.
That's amazing. Oh my goodness. And yeah, and that's an incredible story. Okay, so should we talk about middle grade books? Should we talk about
Yes.
what it is about middle grade books that we love so much?
Yes, I would love that.
Okay, so I will start because, like I said, the reason why I became a writer is because the books that I read as a kid influenced me so much. And so I feel like when I was growing up, basically we had middle grade books, we had picture books, we had middle grade books, and then it just went to adult. And there was like nothing in between. Like we would read a bunch of stuff in elementary school, and then starting in like middle school, I feel like we were just reading adult literature. But I will never forget. So I can talk a little bit about like the books that I loved when I was a kid. So Charlotte's Web, I remember reading in second grade, and we read, it was a big deal because we read it on our own. Like the teacher was like, everyone has a copy of this book. You have to read it on your own. And if there are words you don't understand, you need to go look it up at the dictionary at the front of the class. And I was just like, wow, because it wasn't like a class read aloud, which I also love. We did other things as class read alouds. And I just remembered that book opening a whole world to me about like what I could be as a reader, and how I could care so deeply for those characters that I had never met. And it was just awesome. And then I changed schools between third and fourth grade, and I was not all that excited about leaving. I was going from a public school to a private school, and it was mainly girls. It used to be all girls, but then they added boys. So our class was not in any way close to 50-50, but it was mostly girls. And I didn't know anybody there. But the thing that the school did was that everyone had a book that they had to read over the summer. And for us, it was A Wrinkle in Time. And the reason, so we read A Wrinkle in Time. So the first day when I showed up in fourth grade, I had something in common with these girls who had all gone to school together since kindergarten. and we had something to talk about. So that was the other thing for me, is that books always felt like they were a way to connect to other people that you may not even know yet. So that first day or two, we talked about A Wrinkle in Time, and then we had a class read of A Wind in the Door, which is the second book in that series, and we were so into it. And so that's another thing. And I loved all of Madeleine L'Engle's books. I think I read all of them. And I loved the way that she would have a contemporary setting, but weave in kind of magical or sci-fi elements so that you couldn't really tell what was real and what wasn't real. And I tell kids on school visits that one of my favorite books of hers, in addition to A Wrinkle in Time, is called The Arm of the Starfish. And it's still part of the same family, believe it or not. It's like Meg's daughter who has this adventure, and it has a whole marine biology aspect to it. And there are these scientists who are trying to figure out how starfish regenerate their limbs and see if they can apply it to people. And I was like, how cool is that? Because that really like spoke to my medical brain as well. So that was awesome. And then my all-time favorite book when I was a kid was The Westing Game by Ellen Raskin, which went on to win the Newbery Medal. But I found it because, we had a very small school library, but I loved it. And I read I felt like I had just like run out of books to read. And I went in there one day and I closed my eyes and I turned around and I decided wherever my finger landed was what I was going to read. And it landed on The Westing Game. And then I was like, okay. And so I read it, and one of my best friends also read it. And then we had all these discussions about what was going on, what we thought was happening. And the premise of that story, of course, is that there's a rich old man who gathers these people together at the reading of his will, and all the heirs find out that he died under mysterious circumstances, and whoever figures out what happens gets all of his money, all of his millions. And I loved the fact that it was multiple points of view, that there were adults and children, and of course the main child protagonist is a girl named Turtle Wexler, who was just so spunky. Like, she was one of those girls that if you pulled her braid, which some kids did, she'd kick you in the shins. And that was such the opposite of who I was as a child that I totally admired her, and I loved it. Yeah, and it was just a very heartwarming book where all these people with kind of different points of view come together and you realize what they have in common. And I read that book over and over again. And I'm proud to say that I required both of my children to read it, and they loved it too, despite being required. Yeah, so that's where my love of middle grade began. And it was kind of those things that I had in mind when I started writing Midsummer's Mayhem. So Brent, you already talked about your love of Twilight. What about some middle grades that you loved when you were younger before you became a literary agent?
That's such a great question. I feel like I missed out as a kid on a lot of middle grade because, like I said earlier, in elementary school, I really didn't read a lot in elementary school. And, you know, in middle school, I kind of jumped straight to YA. And so I feel like I really have connected with middle grade so much as an adult, you know, where I didn't necessarily have that experience as a kid reader. But I do remember when I went from reading a ton of young adult to reading a lot of middle grade, it felt like slipping into like a warm bath or like a cozy blanket. I feel like I was so surprised because all of this young adult that I was reading was like life or death, you know, like is, you know, dystopian, overthrowing the government, you know, all apocalypse, like all sorts of topics like that. And then going from that, like teenage angst to middle grade, which is a different mindset, different emotions, different tone. It was really lovely. And I feel like, I feel like even today, I kind of prefer middle grade over young adult because of that, because as a person, I just connect more with the emotions that go into a middle grade novel as opposed to a young adult novel. I certainly love young adult very much, but you know, middle grade versus YA, they're just two different things entirely. But some of the middle grade that I really love, I loved Charlotte's Web so much as a kid, as an adult. I loved reading it in the winter because it makes you yearn for summer, you know, and to be on a farm under the sunshine. And that novel is just exquisitely beautiful. It's such an incredible like love letter to friendship. And I really love, what I really love about Charlotte's Web is that it takes this idea that, you know, death is kind of like the most terrifying thing to us as humans. Like there's really nothing worse than death. And I love that in Charlotte's Web, you kind of, the author really shows you that even after, you know, something unimaginable, like an unimaginable tragedy, you know, you can still find joy and you can heal from that and be okay. And I remember when I read Red, White, and Whole for the first time, when you sent me this manuscript, immediately I felt like I felt like I saw in this book what I saw in Charlotte's Web. So for me, both Charlotte's Web and Red, White, and Whole are just two of my absolute favorite novels in the entire world. And I think both are truly, you know, the finest children's books ever written. And I think what I was saying about Charlotte's Web, like that is really what I connected with so much in Red, White, and Whole, is that, you know, something horrible happens, the worst thing you could possibly imagine happens, and still, you know, the character is okay. And not only is the character okay, but the character is able to feel joy again. And I think that certainly kid readers need that message, but adult readers need that message as well. And so I think middle grade is just an amazing category, not only for kid readers, but I think that middle grade is there for adult readers to return to when they're feeling nostalgic, perhaps, but also just when they need to be reminded of those experiences of being a kid that kind of still ring true to being an adult at the same time.
Oh, yes. You know, well, first of all, thank you for saying that. That's like mind blowing. But I think that's one of the things that I love about middle grade as an adult is that, you know, when you're a child, you don't expect to understand everything, right? You kind of, you know, you're still in this world where people are telling you what to do all the time. You don't have control over most things, and you just kind of have to, you know, find your way through. And the really cool thing about middle grade literature is that you can touch on really difficult topics, like really kind of earth-shattering for the person topics. And of course you can have adventures and kind of like have world, you know, challenging topics as well. But you know, in any middle grade book, the biggest stakes are the ones for the character, right? Like, what do you do when somebody you love is in trouble? Or what do you do when you need help, but you have no idea how to ask for it? And so middle grade books tackle that with the understanding that the main character cannot solve these issues by themselves. That is the thing that is amazing to me. And you know what? You grow up to be an adult and you realize you don't have all the answers. And like you're the grown-up and you're kind of supposed to, but you can't possibly. And you grow up to be an adult and you realize that there are problems that you can't solve, right? There are things that happen that we have no control over as adults. And the thing about middle grade literature that is so amazing and compelling to me is that pretty universally, even though you cannot solve the big problems, you leave the reader and the character with hope. Because I think that's the job of middle grade literature, is to help us understand how to navigate this world that we live in, where we'll never know all the answers. We'll never control everything. We'll never be able to stop sad things from happening. But we can learn how to navigate that world and learn to kind of find happiness afterwards. And I think that's why, as an adult, I love middle grade books so much. And they put it, they make these, the stories have to be simple enough for kids to understand, but I mean, they're still pretty complex. But the messages just shine through. And that's why I love, reading and writing it. And, when I wrote Red, White, and Whole, it was a terrifying and exhilarating experience, as you know, since I told you about it, right? I had this idea in my head of a girl who, kind of felt torn between worlds, but then had to deal with something really devastating, which was the, serious illness of her mother, and find a way to navigate that. And her coming to realize that all these places where she felt so different from other people, that she had a lot more in common with them than she thought, and that ultimately that like love lasts no matter what happens. So yeah, it was really scary for me to write. And I'm so grateful that you liked it and that it's been published, but that was hard. And I think that's the other thing about middle grade that is fascinating to me, is that the act of writing it means that you become really vulnerable, that you like put stuff on the page that, at least in my experience, I never expected to write about stuff like this. And this ties back to what you said earlier about what books can show you as a reader, that people like you exist in the world and they're okay, and they like live their lives, and they have adventures, and they have friends, and it's the same thing for me as a longtime reader. Like, I never read about anybody like me when I was growing up, and and then in America or in India. Like when I went to India, I read stories about Indian characters, many of whom lived like thousands of years earlier. So I never saw books about me and my experience, and I continued not to see any books about me and my experience until I was an adult. And the idea that I get to write books for kids who are like me and for kids who are not like me is so just, it's just amazing. It's incredible to me.
I love that. And when you were talking, I kind of realized that I think part of what makes middle grade so appealing is that when you're a kid, when you're a small kid around picture book age, it's like, your parents are helping you get dressed in the morning and telling you what to do. And it's like, okay, now is time to do your homework. Now is time to, take a bath or go to bed. And I think that when kids hit middle grade age, that's when they are starting to have autonomy and they are making decisions for the first time. And I think that when someone is not bossing you around as much and you have autonomy, you start to think about yourself as a person and your place in the world and who you are, and what informs the decisions that you make. And I think that, that idea that like in middle grade, it's the first time that these kid protagonists are really coming into themselves and figuring out who they are. I think that's what makes it so appealing, for me as an adult, is that even as an adult, at multiple times in your life, you are, still questioning, your identity and your place in the world, and trying to make sense of it all. And so going back to middle grade books where, the characters are also experiencing that, I think helps me as an adult, make sense of all the madness in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that middle grade kids are, of course, friends are really important, but they're still tied to their families. And so I think that mix of family and friendship is just it's so fantastic in middle grade books. And I think that these are the years where you kind of become who you're going to be as a person. Of course, you're going to grow up and mature some more. But honestly, the stuff that I loved when I was a middle grade reader is, that's still the stuff I love today. And I tell kids that during school visits. I'm like, hey, all these things you're into right now, you're probably going to be into them like for your whole life. And when you get to be an adult, you'll think back and you'll be like, wow, like those video games were really cool. And I'm still interested in them. So yeah,
Yes.
I just love writing books for kids of this age for that reason.
Yes, I love that.
Let's see. All right, so what else? Okay, I'm gonna ask you some random agenting questions. How's this?
Yeah.
What's your favorite part of being a literary agent?
My favorite part, I could never possibly narrow it down to just one thing. So I'll give like a brief overview of the great things to this job. I love, just being able to tell a writer that their dream is coming true, that they have an offer for their book and that their book will be published. There is very little that's more joyous than someone's dream coming true. So that is amazing. And then also, just seeing the books published so beautifully and seeing them connect with their audience, and seeing that people love this book as much as you do. I feel so privileged that like often I am the first person to have read a book, from one of my clients. I think I was one of the first to ever read Red, White, and Whole. And
yes.
The moment I read it, I knew that it was just so incredible. And so for it to now be published and to see people, loving this book as much as I do is just incredible. And, feeling connected, with everyone, through these stories is amazing. So I think that's the best part of the job.
Yay. Well, as on the person on the receiving end, I agree with you. That's the best part of being a writer too. But you know what? I'll tell you the other best part of being a writer for kids, which I never really thought about as I was writing. So when you write a book and you're like, I think I want this to be published, and you go through the whole slog of everything. You get an agent, and you maybe you finally get an offer, and you finally hold the book in your hands, right? The thing that doesn't occur to you until it happens is when a young reader comes up to you and is like, I love your book. And you're like, wait, what? It is the most earth-shattering, wonderful thing. A kid saying to you that they love your book and asking you a question about it that sometimes has never occurred to you, which is amazing because kids, as we know, are really careful readers. And when they're into something, they're really into it. So that is like the biggest thrill for me too. Now, what is the most challenging part about being a literary agent?
The most challenging part, I think, that's a good question. It's a tough question. The challenging part, I think, is just navigating, when things are going wrong. When a book does not have, a good cover, and the author, is not happy about it, or, when we have an amazing book, but unfortunately the publisher, is not giving any resources to support that book through marketing or publicity. It's really difficult to navigate all of that, and to help a writer make their way through that. But ultimately, these beautiful books being published and finding their audience, of course, it's worth all the heartache or drama that may ensue, in order to get there.
Yeah, I hear you, and you're kind of on the front line there too, because you have to kind of convey things in a diplomatic way.
Yes.
I would say that the hardest part of being a writer is waiting. As you know, all of this entire process is full of waiting. But the good news is that at least working with you, I don't have to wait for you. You're always super fast about everything. So that is my motto too, is that if there has to be waiting involved, it's not on my part. Like, I'm going to get my stuff done quickly and on time. So it's very funny. But yeah, the waiting is hard. But you know what? Ultimately, it is almost always worth it.
Yes, and time moves so quickly these days. I feel like one disorienting part to this job is that especially with heavily illustrated books, we will sell them, and if we sell something today, the publisher may say, okay, this is for our fall 2023 list, and you think to yourself like, wow, that's so far away. But what inevitably happens is that you blink and 2 years have gone by in an instant, and you're there and the books show up on your doorstep. And I feel like we experienced that together. I mean, we sold a picture book, your picture book that comes out in March of next year. When did we sell that?
In March of 2018.
Okay, see, perfect example, right? Is that five? That's 5
It's
years.
4 years. 4 years. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, but it feels like 80 years. You're like, wait, what?
Yes, it's wild.
That was the first book we ever sold together, which is just bananas to think about, but it's worth the wait. It's a beautiful book. It's going to be fantastic. Okay, so before we run out of time and start taking questions, do you want to talk about some recent reads that you loved?
Yes, I would love that. So I am a huge fan of the writer Kathy Appelt. She is my favorite. She truly is one of my favorite children's novelists. I think she's like just the finest storyteller. Her craft is incredible. And you can tell that she puts her heart and soul into these books. It emanates from the pages. And I just read her newest one, Once Upon a Camel, which is beautiful. It's about a camel who is saving these two baby birds from a dust storm in the desert, and it is thrilling. And I have to, plug my favorite novel from her, Keeper. So Keeper is about a little girl who lives on an ocean, on a beach in the Gulf of Texas, and she lives with like an aunt figure and sort of an uncle figure because her mother is a mermaid who went into the ocean and disappeared. And Keeper ruins the proposal. So her uncle is going to propose to her aunt figure, and Keeper ruins it and is just ruining so many different things in life and feels lost. But a blue moon is coming up, and the blue moon is when you can wish, send a wish to the mermaids and they will grant it. So the blue moon is coming, and Keeper is going to go in her boat, and she is going to find her mother and make her wish to set everything right. And the novel is so, it's more incredible that I could, possibly do justice explaining. But I really love it.
All right, wait, let me interrupt you, because I'm gonna go back and forth. Okay, so okay, ready? All right. I just read Worst Case Colin, which is coming out next Tuesday, from Rebecca Caprara. I'm actually going to be at her launch, kind of talking to her about this book. And this is a novel in verse, and it is so fantastic. I just read it in like one giant gulp yesterday. And so it's mainly free verse, but it also has like some concrete poetry and things like that. And this is about a boy who has like a worst case scenario, like a disaster notebook, where he just like makes lists of things to do in case something terrible happens, like an avalanche or, a dust storm or, a fire, that kind of thing. And he is a 12-year-old who is kind of still recovering from the death of his mother 2 years earlier. And so he lives alone with his dad, who is brilliant, like a brilliant mathematician, but who has a hoarding problem, and it's getting worse. And he's got two best friends, kind of like a kooky, outspoken guy friend, and just a really wonderful friend who is a girl. And I just loved it. I loved it. It's set in Arizona. It has this kind of like desert feel, and like, the contrast between the house where he feels like he's going to be buried by all the stuff that is accumulating, and like the wide open like desert areas that he bikes to just to like have room to breathe. It's just incredible. She did such a wonderful job. And this is an example of how a verse novel can take really difficult topics and make them digestible for readers. And I absolutely loved it. I literally finished it last night and I'm just like, oh my goodness. So I had to talk about it. And then
I love the cover.
Isn't it awesome? It's just so awesome. And like all the things from the book are in there. And I love it. So I'm excited to talk to Rebecca about it next week as well, in person, which will be like amazing, an in-person outdoor launch. And then I'm also reading another advanced reader copy of this book by Gillian McDunn, Honestly Elliot. It is about a boy with ADHD whose parents are divorced, and he kind of shuttles back and forth between them, and his dad is about to have a new baby with his stepmom, and he feels kind of like this baby is probably going to replace him because his dad's disappointed in him for just not being able to get his act together. And it's really heartwarming. So I can't wait to finish this one. But yeah, Gillian like writes such beautiful books, and pretty much anything she writes I will read. So I'm excited for this one too. Now you go.
Love that. Yes, well, those are all of the books, but I would love to ask you some questions about your 3 middle grade novels.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yes. So Midsummer's Mayhem and Much Ado About Baseball, they are both Shakespeare retellings. And I am curious, you know, you have written many books that are not retellings at all, that are just, you know, original from you. The fact that these 2 were retellings, did that make the plotting any easier?
Ooh, okay, so that is such a great question. All right. So as you know, they're not straight retellings, right? They're kind of like inspired, you know, inspiration for the story. And I think the biggest thing to think about when you're writing a retelling is, or when you're inspired by something, an already existing work of literature, is how much do you want to keep from that previous story and how much do you want to branch out on your own? And in the case of Midsummer's Mayhem and Much Ado, I wanted to make sure that this was a story of the kids that was kind of natural to the kids, but I wanted certain elements from the plays to come in. So for me, with A Midsummer Night's Dream, what did I love about it? I actually like made a list before I started writing the story about what is it that I like about A Midsummer Night's Dream? Why would I want to put this into the story? And I loved, of course, the magical aspects, right? The fact that there was magic in the story. So I wanted some magic. But I wanted to have certain rules around the magic. And then I loved the idea that fairies were interacting with human beings in the play. And like the human beings couldn't really exactly tell that they were fairies. So I modernized that and said, okay, what if the fairies were really trying to blend into human society? Like how would they act and what would they do? And then the other thing was A Midsummer Night's Dream, you know, as funny as it is and is, you know, kind of like beautiful as it is, it's at heart about conflict. It's about conflict and jealousy. So Oberon and Titania are fighting, right? They're fighting over a boy, and the girls, Hermia and Helena, and the guys, Lysander and Demetrius, are fighting over each other, right? Over each other's relationships. So at the heart of all of this is jealousy and conflict. And I was like, that's what needs to be in this story. So when I wrote the book, this story was about Mimi, this 11-year-old girl who loves to bake, but she's kind of the one that is witnessing all the conflict around her. Like her 2 sisters are always arguing. She herself feels like she's kind of like forgotten in this family full of talented people. And then of course the overarching story is that there is a big fairy conflict going on. And that's why all these kids get drawn into their argument. So that's what I wanted. And then the other thing was, you know, there's one very important character from Midsummer Night's Dream who does not appear in Midsummer's Mayhem, and that is Puck. And I did that on purpose because Mimi, the main character, kind of plays Puck a little bit in that she's trying to do something good and it doesn't quite work out that way. She instead causes like a whole mix up and then has to make up for it. So that was kind of those were the parts of the play that I wanted to include. And then with Much Ado About Baseball, so clearly it's inspired by Much Ado About Nothing because it started with the idea of 2 people who have so much in common. And because this is middle grade, they should clearly be friends. But they kind of can't be friends because they're like, so like they know something about the other that really makes them kind of unable to extend that hand of friendship. And so in the play, Much Ado About Nothing, there are two characters who are clearly meant for each other, you know, to be in love, and they are bickering all the time until all of their friends trick them into thinking that the other one actually loves them. And then they're like, oh, okay, well, I'm in love with you. Fantastic, because you're in love with me. And aren't you awesome? And we do have a lot in common. So I wanted to do a middle grade friendly version of that, where there are two kids who are supposed to be friends and they can't be friends until somebody pokes them. But the other thing about this book is that it's also a mashup with that and Midsummer's Mayhem. So there are magical characters from Midsummer Night's Dream who end up in there as well. And, you know, Much Ado About Nothing, as much as it is a comedy, has like a slightly darker kind of plot. There's some really serious things that go on in that play. And so there's some slightly kind of sadder and scarier things that happen in Much Ado About Baseball as well.
I had never thought of Mimi as the Puck character before, but now that you say it, in hindsight, of course, it makes sense. But I love that.
It's like
so
inadvertent Puck.
Yes, I have another question. So I love this novel. You know, every time we talk, I can't, you know, stop talking about it. And one of the things that I really love about this novel is, you know, and that I love about the cover especially, is that we have red, white, and blue. And when I think of this book, I not only think of the Indian American representation, I know that that's a huge part of this book, but I just think about the American representation. And I think that this book for me is not, you know, only about, you know, what it's like to be Indian American, but I think it's beyond that. It's just about what it's like to be American. And I love that that's represented in the cover very subtly. And I would love to hear you talk about just what you think on that topic, that like, not only in this novel are you exploring being an Indian American, but you're also exploring being American. And what do you think, like, hypothetical, you know, little blonde white boy, you know, picking this book up from the library, like, what would he take away from the book in your view, you know, along those lines?
That's so interesting. So, okay, so in terms of it being, I really do think the book is about what it is to be American. And part of the reason is because, you know, in the book, even though it's set in 1983, there are people that come from different places in the world and all have different perspectives. You know, the main character, Reha, you know, she has this sensation, her, you know, literally the first line is, you know, I have two lives, right? One that is Indian, one that is not. And she feels disconnected between the person she is during the week when she's at school and the person she is on the weekends when she's with her parents and their community. But I think one of the interesting things about this book is that although she experiences people in both settings who don't quite understand her point of view, like she gets, you know, whatever, she's in the mall and somebody asks her, do you speak English? And she's just like, oh my goodness. And, you know, there's a girl in class who's like, do you speak Indian? And she's like, oh my goodness, there's no one Indian language. Like she can't even say all the things that come into her head. And likewise, you know, she just feels like her parents, especially her mom, just doesn't get like the whole idea of like, I just want to go to a middle school dance and just be a regular kid. As much as she experiences some of those things, I think one of the things I wanted to get across in this book is that a lot of that feeling of being in different worlds is because of her. It's because her own internal thoughts. Because ultimately, when really difficult things happen in her life, her mom gets really sick with leukemia, she's in the hospital, all these people from different parts of her life help her. And I think that that's one of the things that is so beautiful, that even the people that she wasn't sure if they would understand who she really is in her heart, when the, you know, when the chips are down, they helped her. And she had, there's a line near the end of the book where she realizes that they're all her family, like all these people from all these different perspectives are all part of her community and they all care about her. And that's one of the things that helps her get through the really difficult time in her life. So that's kind of the part where I was like, oh, it's about being American. And not only Indian American, is that there's an entire diverse community of people who are like her and people who are not like her, at least in her mind, who all care about her. And then the other thing is that I would say that, you know, so many of the struggles in this book are pretty universal, like no matter who you are. I think that the struggles of adolescence involve feeling, you know, wondering about where you really belong. I think that is so universal. Like, am I like these people or am I like those people? I don't know. Maybe I'm like neither. Maybe there's really nobody else who has ever experienced the things that I experienced. I think all of us think those things during adolescence. And so I think that anybody who is at that age or has been that age can understand what this feels like. And then the other thing is that so much of this is just about family and friendship and love. And that's universal too. No matter who you are or where you come from, you care about people, and sometimes you're in conflict with those you care about. And sometimes you can't be with those you care about. My goodness, if the last year and a half has shown us anything, it's that. And sometimes you lose the people you care about. But there is a way forward. And to me, at least, and especially to Reha in this book, the way forward is through connecting to people, is through sharing your experiences with people.
I love that. I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
So you write picture books and middle grade. What do you feel like you are able to do in a middle grade novel that you are not able to do in your picture books?
Whoa. Oh, that's a rough one. Okay. I mean, here's the thing. I love picture books. Like, I love them. And I really do think that the artist brings half or more than half of the story to a picture book, which is just incredible. I think with a novel, you're just able to linger more in your character's mind and give a lot more internal information to your reader. And in terms of, you know, world building, you just get to spend a longer time in that world. So I think that's really it. And, you know, obviously I think picture books are for everybody, but I think that, you know, with a middle grade novel, you have to have a certain amount of maturity to understand kind of all the ins and outs of what are going on with the characters. And then I really do think you just get to you have room for more, you know, you have just room for more silliness, for more adventure, and for more really serious, like, you know, heartbreaking and heart-filling emotion in novels. And the cool thing is that because they're not illustrated, people get to imagine what these characters are like. And that is its own kind of magic, is that everybody who reads your book gets to picture their own main character and own, you know, side characters. And, you know, this is part of why, like, I love movies, but I very, very rarely think that a movie adaptation of a novel is anywhere approaching as good as the novel. And it's because I want my characters that I've imagined to be on the screen, and they couldn't possibly. So yeah, I think that's the real magic, is that people get to imagine their own world in their own heads with novels.
That's an amazing answer. I love that. Well, before we take audience questions, I just have to say that this generation of kid readers are so lucky to have Rajani LaRocca books out in bookstores and in their school libraries. You know, your books are so special, and you are so special, and it's just an amazing thing to behold.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. And Brent, couldn't have done it without you. Honestly, I think you were responsible for many of my books existing, and not just because you sold them, but because the working relationship we have means that I feel free to experiment and try things that I'm not sure I would have done otherwise. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to say thank you to both of you. You have such a heartwarming and touching relationship. I have all the warm fuzzies right now sitting up here in my office at the library. So that was just delightful. And before I get to the questions, I just want to give a shout out, since Brent, you mentioned Kathy Appelt's books. I read The Underneath maybe 6 years ago. I have never cried more in a book, like across any age group, across any genre, than that book. So if you want a good cry, I recommend that one. So we've gotten a few questions. The first one is, are publishers reluctant to have an author bring out multiple titles in the same genre at the same time so sales don't cannibalize each other?
A publisher is reluctant, to allow that to happen, and it's a sell-in issue. So basically, the publishers, when they are presenting their books to retailers, bookstores, the small independent bookstores, but also Target and Barnes and Noble and all of these places, those stores, they will not carry every single book from that author in the same genre, all around the same time. Some of the books will not go into that store. And so it's a disservice to the books. And that's why publishers are hesitant to do that.
Rajani, because I know you've had 5 picture books come out lately. I mean, also for you as an author, that must be hard for promotion. So if you look at it from that perspective.
So I'm not going to complain because it's an embarrassment of riches. But I will say that there's some things you have control over, and like when something is published is something you almost never have any control over. So these were sold to different publishers. Like we sold 2 in 2018, 2 in 2019, and 2 in 2020, and they all came out in 2021. So, and the publishers were aware of the other books coming out. So, there's nothing I can do, but also it's been fun. And I think sometimes when you have a lot of books coming out at once, the fact that one is coming out and people are paying attention to you means that they're more likely to see the other books that you have coming out. So in some ways it can be positive. It's been a zany year, but you know what? That's okay. They're all zany years.
It does sound like a wonderful yet exhausting problem to have.
Yes.
Okay, our next question. There seems to be a theme in the books you both like, write, represent that have heart and a clear core emotion in the story. That is conflict, jealousy, loss, finding your place, more so than the actual events and plot. This seems like an intangible, like it's either there or it isn't. Are there suggestions or things you've seen done to help writers get to the root/heart of their story?
Ooh.
I think I think as a writer, to get to the heart of your story, you think about cracking open your readers' hearts. And I think that the way to go about answering that question, how do you crack open your readers' hearts, is you have to crack open your own as the writer. And so I think as the writer, if you are not feeling that throughout the course of writing your project or, editing it, then perhaps that's like a gut instinct that there is still some further work for you to do.
What I tell writers is that we write fiction, but we write about the truth, and that's in terms of emotion. So that's what I try to do. So first of all, what I would say is write your first draft, because honestly, you may not know what your book is about until after that first draft is done. And then when you're reading it, looking to revise it, just make sure that the heart of the most important scenes is really there. And, I think that is the magic of literature, is that it expresses what it is to be a human being. And we've all had so many experiences in our lives. And I'm not saying you have to write a memoir. I'm not saying you have to take something that happened to you and reproduce it exactly in a book. I have not done that. But take something that really made you feel strongly and take that emotion and put it into your pages.
That was some really great writing advice. I especially liked the crack open your own heart. And it was in our keynote last night where Leonard Marcus talked about, he felt like some of the most memorable, powerful picture books are written by authors who have the most salient emotional memories from their childhood. So it sounds like both of what you're talking about, it really is that powerful punch of connection. Okay, wow. All right, here we go. So we have 2 more questions that I think we'll have time for. This one is specifically for you, Brent. It says, what is the timeline of your authors, the ones you represent, in submitting their projects to you? Are you looking for a steady pipeline of projects, or is it more on the quality of the project, no matter how long it takes?
So it looks different for each writer. I represent writers who, are like Rajani, putting out multiple books a year and sending multiple manuscripts. But I also represent writers who work a lot more slowly than that, and they just don't have that same output. And I think that is it's such a personal thing to each writer. What their process looks like. And for the most part, I think agents, we really meet writers where they are and are there to support them and their process, if that answers the question.
I think so. And then there was a second question that's, the person says, I came in late and might have missed it. And just, if you did come in late, this is being recorded and we'll be sending it out to everyone, so you don't have to worry about what you missed. But the question is, how hands are you with your authors and their projects? Do you support accountability and deadlines, or is there more thought partnering? And maybe, Rajani, you want to go first, as being one of Brent's clients. Like, how's it from your perspective? What's it been like?
Oh, I think one of the greatest things about Brent is that he is what you need him to be. Like, seriously. So I think that, so I mean, in general, I feel like I don't send things to him unless I think they're ready to go to an editor. But of course, like, if he has comments or thoughts for me, of course I'm going to take them in and work on my project some more. But I have a really good critique group, and I have great critique partners, so I try and send things through them first and get my projects as good as I can possibly make them before I send them off. But we definitely talk strategy. We definitely talk about, like, what do you think? I've got all these ideas. What do you think I should be working on next? And but he's never one to say, you have to do this or don't do that. He's really open to what is interesting to me creatively, which I think is really important for me. I think I know other writers who have a different experience with their agents, and I'm just very grateful.
Brent, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I think, in terms of my involvement, again, that's something that it looks different with each and every relationship that I have with my clients. Some authors, they really love to be left alone. And will come to me when something's finished. And some writers, they really love collaboration and they love my involvement. And so each relationship looks differently, but I just absolutely love being a strategic partner. And just thinking about, the best publishing strategy and how we can position each book for the most success possible. And for a writer like Rajani, who has so many different books going on, and both that she's publishing and that she's writing and working on, it's just a joy to be able to feel like a true, like, creative and business partner to her throughout this publishing journey.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So we're actually right about on time. Rajani, I know that you're doing a verse novel intensive, I think, for a group called Inked Voices. Do you want to just give a little shout out for that, for any of the authors perhaps who have joined us who might want to know more about it?
Yes, it's through Inked Voices, and I'm doing this with Chris Barron, one of my friends and an amazing verse novelist. And so this Monday, the 27th, is going to be the first session, and I'm going to be talking about drafting your verse novel. So we'll have like an hour and a half. There are some pretty amazing authors signed up to take this course, which is a little bit like, wait a minute, what? But it is fun. We're going to talk about how like what kind of work is best suited for the verse format, and how to draft it, like how to get yourself into that mode. And then we'll have weekly exercises, and there's like a little online community that people are posting their work to. And then 3 weeks later, Chris will give a webinar on revising the verse novel. So, and then we have weekly office hours too, where we like answer questions and kind of hang out with people. So it is huge fun. I think there's still time to sign up, and I would love to have you join us.
It's amazing all that you do in the course of one day. I mean, I am just startled and overwhelmed. So well done. You've really figured it out.
Thank you. I think honestly, a lot of this is about psychology. It's about how to get yourself into the place where you need to be in order to write the things you want to write.
Well, thank you so much. And Eileen, I don't know if you wanted to say one last final word.
Well, I just blown away by everything that Rajani does, and by Brent and your career as it's developed so far is inspirational. Both of you are inspirational figures. And thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to all the participants and those who came late. Again, Kelly said we have recorded this program and we'll post it. So we anticipate there'll be many more people, also additional people, I should say, that will tune into the recording. Eileen, do you have any?
Well, I just would like to say, I feel like I learned so much about Brent's world, which I had no idea about, really. And I just know we just touched upon it, and I thought that was fascinating. And I feel I've just been taking all these notes and putting stars. I just thank you both for being so candid and just allowing us to be in your world. And as a children's librarian, I just have been so inspired and it's just been heartwarming. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for what you all do as a library, getting these books into the hands of kids and just supporting kids.
Yes, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful conversation, and I'm so grateful. I truly think that libraries are magical places, so it's just an honor to be here.
Thank you.
We all agree.
Yay.
So the recording should be available in about 2 days. I'll be sending it out to everyone, and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel. So have a great Saturday, everyone. Thanks for coming. And we have our third and final presentation starting at 2 o'clock. Eileen Robinson, Harold Underdown, and Crystal Allen will be taking us behind the scenes in the children's book publishing world. So feel free to join us then. You can register on our website. See you later, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.